welcome to episode 245 of the Daily Fantasy Edge. My name is Adam Levitan. I'm one of the analysts here at DraftKings. I'm the father of Jerry, the most beautiful beast in the world, and we are coming off of a hideous week. Yes, that's right. This past week was undoubtedly one of the worst, if not the worst, slates of the entire season, maybe in the history of DraftKings. And I'm not one to say that typically. I don't think I've ever called before like a slate a bad slate or a terrible slate or whatever. I mostly think that people who say that, it's just like weak-minded stuff that people say when a slate is hard or when the matchups don't produce layups or the pricing doesn't produce layups. People are like, oh, it's a terrible slate. This slate sucks. It's just another excuse that people give themselves for losing when in fact we're all operating under the same parameters. Like, to me, there's no such thing normally as a bad slate. But I did think that this wild card round slate was different because spending the cap wasn't even easy. I mean, unless you wanted to play Keenan and Melvin Gordon at the high end in the worst possible matchup at Baltimore, the really only viable expensive options were Zeke Elliott and DeAndre Hopkins and T.Y. Hilton. And there were still some questions about Hilton's ankle. Zach Ertz in one of the worst possible tight end matchups. Seattle and Dallas and Baltimore with these ridiculous run rates playing, 1960s football. So yeah, you could make a case that when there are like no options who can outscore Zeke realistically, then yeah, it's a bad slate. When it's hard to spend the cap, when you start to think to yourself, maybe spending $1,000 less than cap and fade when you want to fade DeAndre Hopkins is optimal. Yeah, that's when is probably a bad slate. And that only really happens on 4-game slates with like the most defensive-minded teams possible all on them. But of course, we knew all this going in, right? Talked about it all last week. What it meant was that 20 points was going to go a long, long way. 30 points from a player could break the slate. And that's why I was so shocked that Ezekiel Elliott was only 59% owned in the $20 quarter milli maker, 70% in the 3-3-3. The game theory bros just couldn't help themselves but to fade Zeke. And you could say, yeah, well, DeAndre Hopkins busted though, so he was a good fade. And yeah, there are way more paths to a wide receiver busting than there is a running back like Ezekiel Elliott. Of course, strange things can happen at the wideout position. This Colts defense is so good at keeping the ball in front of them. The whole scheme is dedicated to not giving up big plays. They give up a high catch rate, but everything is in front of them. I saw it last time Houston faced the Colts. So yeah, I liked Nuke a lot. I played him in cash. I still don't think you could compare his floor to Zeke's. And that brings me to one of the guys who did break the slate, Kiki Coutee. And this is what happens on these small slates, on the particularly on the predictably low scoring ones. Either you have the 4K guy who goes for a 30 ball and you win, or you don't have him and you lose. It was really tough to overcome not having Coutee on a slate like this. I thought Coutee was a really, really good play. Talked about it a ton last week in Target article, talked about it in Leverage on the 3-man pod with Houston so thin at wide receiver. No Will Fuller, no Demaryius Thomas. Coutee has seen such an absurd volume when coming off of injury. They haven't shown any concerns there. But perhaps most importantly, as I already mentioned, Colts lead the entire league in lowest average depth of target faced, and Coutee's route tree, if you prefer, is so close to the line of scrimmage. Still, I was a little worried, in the first game off of a hamstring pull, maybe Coutee couldn't do it. So it wasn't like 100% stone lock, not like Chris the God Godwin in week 17 or something. But still thought it was a pretty good play. Played him in cash, obviously caught like a top 5%, top 2% outcome or something. Made all the difference in the world. Speaking of cash, I mentioned Zeke's ownership in the large field GPPs a minute ago, which I guess you could, rationalize somewhat. But then I checked Zeke's ownership in the big $25 single entry double up, and Zeke was only 78.9% owned. I mean, 21% of people in the single entry double up on this kind of slate, on this specific slate, with like no slam dunk options, were like, nah, not going to play Zeke's 25 touches, game flow independence, pass game roll, good matchup. And I get it on a normal slate, like it's always going to be some other guy who could pass him. But on this slate specifically, 21% of people saying no thanks to that in cash shocked me. So to people who say cash is dead, I'm here to tell you that you're wrong. I'm not sure if people really care, but since no four-man this week and no lineup review on DK Playbook due to such a small slate, I figured I'd run through my cash lineup from Wild Card Weekend quickly. Andrew Luck was my quarterback, considered Deshaun Watson and Lamar Jackson. Thought all three were fine. Given like the matchup and a possible ceiling, I thought it was just so much more likely that Watson versus Luck would turn into a shootout, so I did prioritize getting to one of them. Luck was cheaper and certainly had the better on-paper matchup. Went with him. Ezekiel Elliott, obviously. Lamar Miller, didn't think that Lamar Miller was a must, given the context. Well, I didn't think it was a must, but given the context of that specific game, the Houston Colts game, I thought there was a chance that he'd handle 100% of the running back touches in a game where 60, 70 points could be scored. And given the slate, that's pretty strong at only 4,900. At the RB3 spot or the flex spot, I went Tariq Cohen. Thought his role was much more secure than Nyheim Hines, and I probably would have gone down to Hines if I thought there was other stuff worth spending for. If I thought it was a priority to get to Keenan Allen or something like that, maybe I would have gone down from Cohen to Hines, but I thought Cohen was more game flow independent. Turned out Cohen was a disaster. Hines was a disaster. I'm shocked that Chicago didn't use him more. DeAndre Hopkins, talked about him already. Even if you didn't love him, it was just hard to find a player with a similar floor ceiling projection in the cap. The salary cap was so soft, we didn't have that many expensive guys to play. Fitting him was easy. Kiki Coutee, obviously wide receiver 2, the slate breaker, talked about him. Nelson Agholor, at the wide receiver 3 spot, I debated between Agholor, Cole Beasley, Michael Gallup. I thought Philly's pass game would have the most secure volume, and Agholor had been playing pretty far ahead of Golden Tate. Certainly close between those Dallas guys and Agholor. Didn't feel great about it, but thought that with the way Philly was likely to attack the Bears, that was the best play there. Tight end, Ebron I thought was so far and away the clear play at tight end with Zach Ertz's matchup with Blake Jarwin having such a rough ceiling. Ebron fit with Luck. Ebron fit in the game that I wanted the most exposure to. He was also cheaper than Ertz by a good bit. And on defense, I went Seattle. One in Baltimore or Chicago. Couldn't get up there, but Dak just takes so many sacks. I thought Seattle was okay. Defense actually ended up not mattering a ton because they all pretty much underperformed except for the Chargers, I believe. So my lineup was good, really all because of Kiki Coutee. Cashed all the double ups easily, won like 78% of head-to-heads or something. So reasonably good week. By the way, before we move on, what in the world happened to Trey Burton? Dude practices full all last week, hasn't been hurt at all lately. And then Saturday night at like 10:30 p.m., the Bears release a statement saying he's suddenly questionable for a playoff game against his old team due to a groin injury. This like so rarely happens in the NFL that guys get added just out of the stone blue on a Saturday night before a playoff game and then miss the game. What could have happened between practice on Friday when he was full and Saturday night? Team Sex is on the case. We'll see. As for GPPs, I played 4 GPP lineups last week. Had a couple decent ones. Had both of the decent ones that I had were Colts Texans game stacks with Zeke and Allen Robinson as one-offs. Both had Nyheim Hines, sadly. And the point I wanted to make was one of them was actually just a 2v2 off my cash lineup. So instead of Tariq Cohen and Agholor, I went to Hines, get myself more of a game stack there in that Indy Houston, and then up to Allen Robinson from Agholor, obviously a way better floor ceiling combo there. But, just a simple 2v2 like that produced a 24-point difference, made a huge difference there. But anyway, what you needed to win GPPs this week, I think, was Marlon Mack, sub 10% owned, scored 26 DK points, and Chargers D, sub 20% owned, 14 DK points. And then obviously you needed Ebron and Coutee and A-Rob and Zeke. Quarterback actually didn't really matter because they all finished so closely together, which is going to happen a lot. I actually didn't play any Chargers D. I just thought it was really going to be tough for them to generate big scores when it's all just running plays from the Ravens. Like they projected to run the ball so many times. But you can see what happens when a quarterback, a raw quarterback, a mistake-prone quarterback like Lamar Jackson gets behind. Tons of chances for sacks. Chargers had 7 sacks, interceptions, big plays. more than a normal quarterback because Lamar is just so raw as a thrower. So yeah, I should have considered, certainly for tournaments, that if the Chargers got a lead, that it was going to be a field day for Chargers defense. And that's exactly what happened. I also didn't play Marlon Mack in any of my game stacks in that game. Maybe a mistake. I didn't think that his pass catching expectation was high enough to find a realistic ceiling. In hindsight, obviously, it's easy to say he should have been part of Colts-Texans game stacks because his TD equity is so high. And so if you think that game's going to go off and this game stack is going to work, Marlon Mack's TD equity is really high. And, it's not like he's incapable as a pass catcher. He just really isn't used that way. And maybe now that's changing now that we're in the playoffs. I mean, Naheem Hines only played 9 snaps. Marlon Mack actually ran 26 routes in that game against the Texans, tied a season high. So it's interesting. Something to think about going into this Chiefs game where the Colts do project to be trailing. All right. Now it is time for everyone's favorite portion of the program. Producer Luke, hit the theme music. By the way, shout out to producer Luke dropping the hammer on Nick Saban last night on Twitter. From the top rope, producer Luke on Saban for the fake field goal. Justin Rao, he says, why do we as a society care so much about celebrities and their day-to-day life? Well, I think the easy answer is people just like to live vicariously through other people. Like I sit in my office all day, highlights of my day include a nude rub down of Jerry before I shower and, going to the smoothie store. So yeah, I think it makes sense. I'd be interested in, what wild things Dan Bilzerian is doing or, who Derek Jeter is dating or whatever. I mean, I'm not personally too interested in those things, but I get how people could be. I do think it's gone too far, right? Like, Alec Baldwin walks down the street and 10 cameras are in his face as his dog takes a dump. I mean, that's crazy. Who cares? But gossip is always going to be popular. I mean, people love it. Controversies, the whole TMZ thing, who's on team sex with who, arguments, breakups. I mean, that's just life. People are always going to be interested in that. I mean, Bravo is like the most popular channel on television right now. Station is absolutely crushing with just gossip stuff. And these people aren't even celebrities. I mean, they're just like insane people. So yeah, I don't think it's going away. Question 5 comes from Andy Pants 47. He says, if DFS is still popular in 15 years and your son tells you he wants to pursue being a full-time player, how would you react? Would you try to talk him out of it? Oh boy, yeah, it's a tough question, Andy. A big issue I have while trying to parent is setting the right example while also being myself. So I make offensive, off-color, inappropriate, mean jokes all the time. I know when and where and what audience to do that with. It's hard. The context part of it is hard. And it's kind of the same thing with gambling. If my kid understood EV, what it takes to win, was working really hard, understood variance, then yeah, I think it's great. But if he's one of these, arrogant idiots who doesn't get it, just blasts off, money, doesn't know how to manage a role, game selection, puts himself at risk of going broke, isn't really trying. And I hope he'd be smart enough to fall into the former category that I just described, but it's just so much rarer compared to the latter. So I guess to answer your question, Andy Pants, is we'll have to see. I didn't explain it as well as I wanted to, but there's so many times in life where I think I can do this because I know better, but this isn't something that I would want my kid to do. I can do this because I know the right spot to do it in, or I know how to handle it, but this isn't something that my kid should see me doing, It's probably not the best way to parent, but I don't know, man. It's not easy. Question 7 comes from Preston Davis. He says, what is your take on the simulation hypothesis, i.e. we humans are actually in a supercomputer simulation instead of living in base reality? I'm super open-minded about all this stuff, about what's going on in terms of technology and anything else. I'm super open-minded about other societies and outer space, other galaxies, other life. I think it would be so arrogant to think that us humans are the only living creatures in this universe when you look up and you see how small Earth is compared to all of space. Like even just as far as the eye can see, which really isn't that far if you think about it. So I've certainly thought some about the simulation hypothesis and read a little bit about it. I'm certainly no expert on it. As of now, I don't think it's likely that's what's going on. Like evolution just makes too much sense to me, and it just explains everything so perfectly that I can't get behind the simulation, which to me right now is a real leap of faith. I do know a lot of smart people that believe in it, though. I'm not completely closed-minded against it. I don't know. I'd be interested to see what you guys think, or if there's any real articles out there that would maybe sell me better than what I've read. All right, last question we're going to do today is question 8, comes from TC3. He says, how much poker do you play when NFL is not in full swing? Very little these days. I have this obsession with my time and valuing it optimally. I actually don't know what's wrong with me. Like, I just can't do anything without thinking, is this the best use of my time right now? Is this plus EV for my life? And it's really bad. I actually talked to a shrink about it. I'm like a deranged individual. I just assumed that everyone thought like that, but she let me know that they don't. And by the way, when I say valuing my time optimally, I do not mean in terms of money. I mean in terms of life EV, like drinking and doing stupid stuff with my friends. That could be plus EV for life. Obviously, it's not plus EV for money. So anyways, back to TC's question. Playing live poker is such a massive, massive time commitment. Driving to the casino, waiting to get into a game, seeing 30 hands an hour, and then you have all these miserable people at the table driving home. So this activity that is so time consuming better be really, really enjoyable for me, or really, really profitable for me to do it. And it's just not either of those anymore. Like, I don't enjoy playing too much like I used to. And I know now for sure there are better ways for me to use my time from a financial EV perspective. For sure. I think maybe the exception and things that, poker stuff that I would consider doing in the off season is like buying into day 2 of a tournament and just trying to run and you buy in for like 10 bigs or 20 bigs or whatever and just try to run it up. Like, that's pretty fun. It's likely to be over quick. Still has a pretty good EV, I think. So yeah, I might do that some. So we'll see. All right. Only one solo pod left in the season. Only one 3-man pod left in the season. The final 3-man will be out on Thursday night. A preview of what promises to be one of the best slates we've ever had in the playoffs on DraftKings. Like, the teams, the offensive players available on this slate are just outrageous. So we will go through all of that with Al and Pete on Thursday night. We will have the last solo pod of the season the following Tuesday. So for Jerry, for producer Luke, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody. We are promoters at DraftKings and also avid fans. Our usernames are Adam Levitan, Al Smizzle, and CSU Ram 88. We may sometimes play on our personal accounts in the games that we offer advice on. Although we have expressed our personal view on the games and strategies in this podcast, they do not necessarily reflect the views of DraftKings, and we also may deploy different players and strategies than what we recommended in this podcast.